Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Practitioners Podcast, where we're applying Jesus-style disciple making to everyday life. This episode and all of our episodes are powered by Navigators Church Ministries, which focuses on helping churches make disciples who can make disciples. For more information or to get connected, go to navigatorschurchministries.org. Friends, today we are going to talk about culture. You remember the old quote that culture eats strategy for breakfast, and today we're going to dive into that specifically around the thing that we are probably most passionate about. Justin, give us a glimpse at where we're headed to today.
Yeah, today we're talking about building a disciple-making culture and the common obstacles that churches face in doing that. So, Tony, you and I have lots of experience walking alongside churches, trying to do it in your own church, in our own church. But there's some common obstacles that happen that are almost expected, right? That you have to move through in order to get to that disciple-making culture that you're looking for. And so that's what we're into today. Tony, recently, this week, in fact, I was sitting with a pastor who I've known a while, and he said, the hard part about this for me is it's hard for me to know what to do. And he's been pastoring a while, and he said, as I think back to the different movements that have happened in the church in terms of strategy, in terms of all right, this is the thing now that the church is focusing on. He said, you think back to the seeker-sensitive movement, the late 90s, early 2000s, I could clearly grasp what it would look like to implement that in my church. He said, and you can move forward, you think about the small group movement that kind of happened and, community pastors and stuff like that. It was fairly easy to get a handle on what it looked like to implement this in the church. He said, but as I listen to disciple making and trying to implement that, it just feels a lot different. It's hard to get a grasp on what it is we're even talking about or how I would tangibly implement that into the church. And so this episode is to try to bring a little bit more clarity around that, but specifically looking at some common obstacles that we see frequently when people try to implement this in their church.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things about this is people often say that they want a disciple-making culture, but they don't quite understand the cost. And that becomes a difficult part because culture requires a certain percentage of people buying into that as an everyday acceptance.
Yeah.
There's stated culture and then there's unstated culture. And so, understanding the obstacles to that is a big, big gift so that you can get really clear about what you need to do to push the culture forward. And that very first obstacle is definition, right? Defining the culture for what it is. It's lack of clarity on aim. It's not knowing exactly what you want and aren't willing to pay the price, right? And so we kind of talk about disciple making as kind of a long, arduous, it's a part of the lifestyle of being a Christian. And so what we're trying to say is, hey, this is what it means to be a Christian, and it includes sacrificing your life for disciple making forever, and that's a hard sell if not done nuanced and with the long-term hope in mind.
Yeah. Now, that definitions piece, right? It's specific, even saying that, we kind of know what you mean, right? But it's also broad, right? It's not just definitions. What does a disciple mean? What does a disciple maker mean? What does discipling look like? Was it include? Was it not include? But also, as you're saying, it's if we don't have a picture in our minds of what this looks like down the road, it's kind of hard to move towards it. Right? Because if I don't know what it looks like down the road, then it's hard to look at, well, where are we now? And what's the distance we need to travel between here and there? Right? So it's a lack of clarity on the aim. It's defining that aim clear enough where we can see what that is and where we are. But Tony, you make such a great point about the experience that you've been having of talking to people that kind of want it, but maybe they don't know what it costs. And when you say that to me, I think about athletes or performers or celebrities that we get to glimpse the greatness that they have, right? So if it's, a baseball player, a basketball player, if it's, some sort of performer in the arts, we get to pop into their life and see a glimpse of the result of all the effort in years of work to get to that. And it's easy for us to be like, man, I wish I could do that. I want to do that. But what we don't often think about is, do we want the lifestyle that they had to live in order to get to that? Right. And I think the same thing's true with this culture thing that we're talking about. Like, it's easy to think about and ideate around, yeah, I would love to have a disciple making culture where the majority of the people, or at least the current within the culture, is moving towards people owning what it looks like to be a disciple, make other disciples, and they're doing that out of who they are, not necessarily because the church is driving some big program to do it. Man, that would be so great. But then, the question, the harder question, right? It's what you brought up. It's like, well, what does it take to get that and to become that? And it's that clarity of definitions, clarity on the aim that we're trying to get to.
And one of the things that we often don't talk about is that you're aiming for one thing, you're going to miss other things. And
Yep.
so, in the world that we live in today, it's really easy to get into the comparison trap. We know that that's true for individuals, but it's also true for movements. It's true for churches. It's true for pastors. As I look at that church down the street and I'm like, man, they're doing like 27,000 things. And I kind of want to go to that church and they're doing this. And man, they've got Tim Tebow coming or, Kirk Herbstreit or any number of amazing, people who I want to hear from. And yet, because I'm aiming at a disciple making culture, I don't really have space for a lot of that. And
Yep.
so, as leaders, we have to understand the cost. And as leaders, we have to get our team to understand the cost. And so,
Yep.
we're not just defining what we're aiming for, but we also need to define the cost and also the benefit, right? There is, generational disciple making comes with a huge benefit. I know we're
Yeah.
kind of making it sound ho hum, but really when you see generations of disciple making, that's the juice, that's the good stuff, that's the vibe. And I love seeing the idea that the church where that is beginning to take root, it will last for generations upon generations.
Yep, absolutely. So that first obstacle there is definitions, like getting clear on what the aim is, what the meaning of all these words are, how we're trying to move towards them. The second obstacle that we're going to talk about out of the three today is ability. So
Mm.
the ability obstacle. And as I think about this obstacle, it's really thinking about, all right, if you're sitting there and you say, yeah, in my church, I want to have a disciple making culture. Well, the first question you have to ask, and it's a sobering one sometimes, is, am I a disciple maker? Have I ever done this? Have I ever helped someone that didn't know Jesus start to know Jesus and then help them grow in their faith to where they're mature enough to do the same thing with others? Or if we want to truncate it a little bit, have we helped a young believer grow and progress to the point where they're now mature enough and have the the things that they need to help somebody else, right? And so if the answer is no, then why should we think that you or that person have the ability to help somebody else do something that you haven't done yet, right? And so what happens then if that person doesn't have the ability, or sometimes even if they have it, they move towards systems and relying on systems over skills. They rely on teaching over modeling. And because leaders are used to pulling different organizational levers, they just start pulling these organizational levers and think that that's going to lead them to the result that they're looking for. And, kind of going back to the things they've used before. And they assume that that's going to be what helps them in disciple making. And it just doesn't work that way. And so that barrier of ability, not can you, but have you and will you, right? It's not a matter of can or can't. It's a matter of have you before and will you now, right? So that ability obstacle, Tony, as you think about that and hear about that ability obstacle, how does that hit you? What have you seen?
Yeah, I think one of the realities is about ability is fear is such a common destroyer of disciple making culture. And so
Yeah.
people who maybe do have the ability but don't believe they actually have it. And so that
Yeah.
self-doubt, that self-talk, all that stuff is an obstacle and it kind of falls underneath this ability idea. There are so many people that don't feel equipped,
Yeah.
right? They don't feel equipped. And that just makes it so tough.
Yeah.
And you know, part of what we have to fight when we're building culture is we have to fight the voices in people's heads that like, hey, you got it, you're ready, you're good. And The best way to do that is obviously by modeling it, one-on-one disciple making,
Yeah.
or and live life on life stuff. But when we're talking about culture, what we're really talking about is ability at scale. And
Yep.
so that takes a long time. And so, you and I have both used LLTs or leading learner teams to kind of help build some of that culture and to get a lot of people in. But even then, sometimes it's hard to convert and convince like, hey, you got it. We believe in you. Let's go get it.
Yeah, that's right. And, you brought up this idea of, do we think we can do it? And with ability, one of the tensions that churches face is that's the reality that a lot of people just feel like I'm not equipped, I can't do it. Sometimes that's predominantly fear because we haven't done it before, haven't hasn't been done with us before. Other times, like it reflects reality, like you probably don't have the skills, and so the way that churches handle that is really, really important. Some churches will just say, "Well, let's lower the bar so far down that then we just start talking like, well, anybody can do this. Here's this book, here's this system, here's this curriculum. All you got to do is if you can read, you can do this." And I kind of compare it to playing the piano, right? Like, nobody would look at what I can do on a piano and say, man, that guy can play the piano. But technically, I can play the piano, right? I can sit in front, I can cause notes to come out that sound like actual notes. And so I'm playing the piano, but there's a huge gap between me playing the piano and somebody that's playing at your local church for worship, right? And it's the same thing in disciple making. So what I advocate is, well, let's not tell people like me in disciple making who are barely banging out some notes on the piano. Let's not try to convince them that they're piano players, right? Let's take with what they have and where they are and say, man, this is good. We can get even better, but it's going to take some work. It's going to take some effort. We need to learn some skills and put some effort in so that we can do this in a way that is worthy of the call that God has put on your life, as opposed to the other option, which I see a lot. Let's just lower that standard way down, right? And make it so that, oh, yeah, well, you're doing it. You're doing it.
And the,
Um,
the, the problem is when you lower the standard when it comes to culture, is what you're essentially doing is you're destroying the idea of a culture because it's not the first generation. The lowering the bar is like it's a small lower, but by the
yeah,
time you get to the second or third generation, it's not even the same category. And
right.
and that really becomes the problem is that you can convince yourself that you can get by with systematizing some of this in round one, but by the time you get to round 2 or 3, nobody's making disciples, and all of a sudden, everyone's signing up for the program or the system that was
Yeah,
never actually meant to be the disciple-making culture you wanted now.
yeah,
As the leader, to overcome the obstacle of ability, you have to hold the line really high.
yep, yep, absolutely.
Third one,
Good.
ownership. Ownership. That's the third obstacle. And man, if you wanna get me on a soapbox, let's talk about consumerism in the North American church. We're not going to too much. Really, what we're talking about when it comes to ownership is that it's not my job to make disciples, right? It's someone else's job. And we see this continually in the church. And we think that oftentimes, if we relegate it to church staff or if we move it over to something else, like uh, if you want to change culture, every person who's sitting in the church has to believe that making disciples is their job.
Yeah. Yep. And it's their job, right? Like a lot of times in the church, we look at it as like, yes, together we're making disciples as a church. But the problem with that is everybody's job is nobody's job, right? Everybody's looking around, assuming somebody else is doing that thing, and nobody's doing that thing because everybody thinks somebody else is. And so that's where that ownership, it's got to get down to an individual level. God has called me to make a disciple. What am I going to do about it? How am I going to move forward in it? And a church full of people like that, that's what gets to a disciple making culture, right? And what we talked about on here before and what I've written a lot about, shameless plug for my book, The Foundation of a Disciple Making Culture, is you have to get a team of people to believe that it's their job, connect them together so that they're moving forward in unity within that culture of the church. And that really is what allows ownership to spread and the fire of disciple making to ignite in the church is when we have a core team of everyday people who believe, yeah, it's the church's job, but the only way the church gets it done is if I'm doing it and you're doing it and they're doing it and moving that forward. So yeah, this ownership thing, like you said, Tony, let me ask you this question. In the church that you're in right now, it's a church that I know well, but I don't know the answer to this question. To what degree, like when you think about the elders, the staff, the core leaders in the church, like are they each and every person in there, are they owning the vision, going out and making disciples, and how's that playing out right now?
So I would say that the answer is kinda, right?
Okay.
Allow me to explain. Everyone has bought in that this is the vision of the church. Where we get into trouble is that you can't own disciple making in seasons. You have to own it all the time. And so, for example, there are people in leadership positions who have made disciples who have made disciples. Also, some of those same people haven't committed to doing that in every season of their life. So
Yeah.
there's a moment in disciple making when someone begins to get it clicks. And when it clicks, it's like, oh, that's not just something that we do. This is who I am.
Yeah.
And that is how we really seal ownership. Because when that clicks in, everything begins to change. And so we have some leaders who are like, nope, you know what, Pastor Tony, Pastor Dave, like I'm all in on disciple making, but then they're not doing it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and so it's or it's not. I mean, listen, it just takes time, right?
Yeah.
And so you can't be all things to all people and be an everyday disciple maker as a part of that process. So there's
Yeah.
always a little bit of tension there.
Yeah.
And part of the reason, and I'll give the leadership team a lot of credit, part of the reason why they bring somebody like me on board, my only real job is to make sure that we're talking about disciple making all the time. And
Nice.
I'm bivocational part-time. And
Yeah.
so that, my job is to be that thorn in their flesh around the idea of disciple making. And it's a job that I gladly do.
Yeah. Well, it's always a work in progress, right? That's the thing
Right.
about culture is it's never finished, right? People are humans. As humans, we struggle with consistency over a long period of time. We're a little bit like Sisyphus of, we're pushing that thing up the hill and then we get tired or we get distracted and then the thing rolls back down again. And we're
Right.
like, oh, okay, I got to get back to it. That's just how we are as humans. So when we're trying to build a culture of this thing, like that's why it's so important that we have lots of owners so that when a couple of them have let it go down the hill a little bit, we got other people like putting our arm around their shoulder and saying, hey, we got to get back to it. Like, let's go. Right. So I love that you're doing that in that church culture and the progress that's continually being made there is exciting. Tony, so we have these three obstacles: definition, ability, and ownership. And as I was thinking about these three, I think they pair pretty well with something we've talked on this podcast before about vision, heart, and skill, right? So if definitions would be the vision, right? We have to have clarity on the aim. We have to know where we're going, what we're doing. Ability would be the skill. And then ownership would be the heart. Like, what does it mean for me? Am I engaged? Am I enlisted in this task? Right. And how do we get more and more people enlisted to the point where it gets down to their identity? Like you mentioned, it comes out of who we are, not just something we do. So, there's really, and when we think about common obstacles, it's similar to the common obstacles that the individual has. Because really, a disciple making culture is a collection of individuals that have teamed together within a congregation or some sort of community, and they're trying to move it forward together to make disciple making a central focal point. Tony, what final thoughts do you have, and then maybe you can take us into our takeaway and action step?
The thing about culture is that when you build it well with the vision, heart, and skill in mind, it will serve you well. And if you build it poorly, it will crumble and you'll be frustrated.
Yep.
So take the time to do it well and get that vision, heart, and skill first and foremost inside of you. And if you're listening, you're probably well on your way because our listeners are the best. Um, but keep working at it. Don't lose hope. And if you need help, as always, don't hesitate to reach out because it's hard to build culture by yourself, especially when you've never seen it. And I'll do a shameless plug here for the Navigators Church Ministries. They're experts at building culture and helping you build church culture. So if you need some help there, be sure to reach out. Okay, let's do takeaway and action step. Takeaway. Disciple making culture grows when people know the aim, have the skill, and take ownership. Disciple making culture grows when people know the aim, have the skill, and take ownership. And the action step, ask where your church is the weakest. Is it clarity, training, or ownership? And whatever the answer is, start there. Where is your church the weakest? Clarity, training, or ownership? And start right there. As always, we're thankful for you. We're thankful for the opportunity to talk about disciple making every other week, and we can't wait to dive in next time. So until then, be sure to hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, and go and make disciples.